does. He represents our 5th congressional district, so he represents your parents, and he will represent you guys if he isn't already, because I know some of you guys are seniors who are ready to vote in the next couple of weeks. This is his 4th term in Congress. He serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which deals with energy policy, telecommunications issue, food and drug policy, public health research, and you guys may have some questions on everything going on right now. And we were just talking about Representative Lattis, and there's some things he has to do with the CDC this week as you've been paying attention to the news, you know what's going on. So at the end, we might have some time for question and answer. You guys can do that. He's also the vice chairman for the subcommittee on communications and technology. He's the assistant majority whip, which means that he helps, if we haven't taken government yet, he helps kind of organize his party when it comes time to take votes in Congress to make sure everything's lined up. So his top priorities, just him personally, his platform, he wants to balance the budget, reduce the national debt, and come up with common sense reforms for the government. Representative Latta went to Bowling Green High School, member of the NLL, grew up in Bowling Green. He still lives in Bowling Green and with his 2 daughters and his wife. So he's right here from Northwest Ohio. Without further ado, Representative Latta.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Come on.
Good morning.
I tell you, when I went to Bowling Green, Sylvain used to take care of us at Bowling Green in sports. So let's hear a little more out here from you today. One more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. I want to make sure everybody's awake. Well, thanks very much for letting me be here today. I'd just like to get a quick survey. How many seniors do we have here today? Okay. Juniors? Sophomores? Freshmen? Great. Okay. Seniors, raise your hands again. Higher. Higher. There. How many are 18? Got seniors are 18. Are you registered to vote?
Yes.
Great. Thanks very much for doing that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But no, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I represent, kind of give you an idea real quick about my district, about me. As mentioned, I graduated from high school at Bowling Green, went to BGSU, went to law school at UT, and back in 1990 I was elected as a Wood County Commissioner, and I served as a Commissioner in Wood County for 6 years, being re-elected in 1994. 96 I was elected to the Ohio Senate, and when I was in the Senate I was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, so we had responsibility over all criminal, civil, juvenile, and about anything else they could figure out to give me the committee. I was in the Ohio House, and I chaired criminal over there, and I was in the Senate for 4 years, the Ohio House for 7 before I was elected in 2007, a special election to the U.S. House. But my district, to kind of give you kind of an overview real quick, I have 191,000 here in Lucas County. So about 66,000 in the city of Toledo. I can actually almost give you the boundary, but I won't take that much time. But pretty much from part of Toledo, running around just north of the University of Toledo, which is south of me, over to 23 down and over. So I really have, Sylvain Township, Turkey, White House, Waterville, Swanton, Maumee, Ottawa Hills, and so I have this section of the county. I have Williams, Fines, Paulding, Van Wert, Mercer County down through Salina to Grand Lake St. Mary's, Folk, Henry, Putnam, Wood, Hancock, Hardin, Wyandotte, and I have half of Ottawa County from Oak Harbor, everything going to the west. So I have about 721,000 people. That was when we did our redistricting for the state of Ohio. Our districts went up in size with the population of the United States. Of course, as you know, from the Constitution, we have to every 10 years do the census. And so I have 721,000. So everybody in this room is my boss. And anybody that comes down to D.C. that's new to the House, I always say, always remember that when you walk down the hallway in the 3 office buildings that we're housed in, we all have the same first name, which is representative. Because my job is to be out with the people I represent and take that back to Washington. As you study government, our founders, they really, when they went to Philadelphia, in 1787 in May, they really didn't know what they were supposed to be doing there. Some people thought they were only there to kind of tweak the Articles of Confederation, which were a complete failure. And they had to, so when they really started working on it, it was like, okay, the three branches of government. You know, sometimes people think that, oh, it was real simple how this thing worked and everything. I know it took 4 hard months. You had people that came, you had people that left. You know, it was one of the hottest summers on record in Philadelphia in 1787. You got to remember what these people used to wear, all wool clothing, and, you know, there's no air conditioning. But they also made a pact that nobody would ever talk outside of the building of the Constitution Hall, what they were saying inside. So they also shut all the windows, and they shut the windows and they put guards at the door. So, I mean, it was closed up. But when they looked at the House of Representatives, you know, there's kind of a debate. It should be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, how long should it be? But it really came down to 2 years. But one of the things that the founders wanted, they wanted one house to be able to turn rapidly if something was going on in the country. Because remember back then, the United States Senate wasn't a direct election. They came from appointments to the General Assemblies from their states. So they said, if we're going to have folks that had to turn quickly, we wanted that to be the House. And so that's how you have the 2-year term. So I know some people say, isn't that short? But I think I would really fight anybody that ever wanted to change it to make it a longer term. Because we've got to be able to turn one house quickly. Because the founders, I think, looked into a crystal ball and they were absolutely right. But one of the things, let me just tell you, I think it's great what you have here, to have an organization, a group such as this, because, you know, one of the things I hear when I go around over and over and over, you know, well, nobody ever listens to me. I might as well not get involved because nothing's going to happen. But, you know, if you go back to 1787, that's probably the exact same thing that a lot of people in the United States were thinking at that time. You know, we're a very infant country. Nobody really took it seriously. Most places in the world thought it was going to be a failure. Nobody ever thought that there were people in the United States that were actually at the Constitution Convention that didn't think that was going to work. But it was because people came together and had to work. Because, you know, one of the things you hear people say, well, there's a lot of fighting going on in Washington. How many people have heard that line? There's a lot of fighting going on. And nobody's really paying attention to what's going on, etc. That really started in the second session of the first Congress, because the first Congress came in the election of 1788. So in 1789, we did not have any political parties in the United States in 1789. But in 1790, the very next year of that first Congress, they started having something called factions. And so you had a group of individuals that thought more like Alexander Hamilton, who was a Federalist. You had more people, another group of individuals out there that thought more like Thomas Jefferson, who was at that time what they called Democrat Republicans. And they thought that there should be less government. And so what happened was that one side went out, the Hamiltonians went out and started getting some newspapers so they could get and buying them so they could get their views out to people. And so then the Jeffersonians said, you know, we got to do the exact same thing. So you had all this already starting at a very early time in our nation's history. And, you know, sometimes people think that times are rough today. So just think of this. You're in an infant country that nobody thought was going to make it. That you had a lot of enemies around the world that would love to take whatever you had. You had, early on, a situation where the Vice President of the United States shot and killed the former Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton, in a duel. You had one member of Congress spitting another member's face on the floor of the House before it was in Washington. And one guy hit one guy with a cane. The other guy picked up the fireplace tongs, and so they had a battle going on the House floor. You had a situation of a war of 1812, what we're celebrating right now, that the British had never left even this area. If you know the history of our area, they were here. They didn't fulfill what they were supposed to have done after the War of Independence. So the question if we're going to survive then. We had, the horrible issue of slavery that enveloped over this country. And we had a civil war that took over 750,000 lives. But this country still survived. And why was it? because people had a common view of what this country was, and we've got to be able to do it today. You know, one of the things that I know when I talk to very young class, and that's one of the great things, I get to talk to the kids in kindergarten from, people working on their doctorate. But one of the things I tell the really younger kids to try to, how things work sometimes is you try to get some cooperation, and sometimes you have to compromise and work on things. I always tell this one story of how you have some kids in the district who say, you know what, we'd like to have a national color being red. And so I explained how the bill's introduced and how you go through Congress, and then it would go over to the Senate. But all of a sudden, with the Senate, they've got somebody over there that said that their kids actually wanted the color to be blue. And then they pass it out as blue, and then it goes to a conference committee. If we have to, it might be that we can work it out. And so I always ask the kids, what happens when you mix red and blue together? They said, we'll end up with purple. I said, well, sometimes that's what happens. That'll be your new color. But it's really important that folks always remember what we have in this country. Because, again, there's no place like this on earth. And one of the things that I worry about, everybody in this school and across my district, across this country, my daughters are 21 and 22. I want them, when they graduate from college, to be able to go out and get a job. I don't want them to leave Ohio because, if you talk to your folks, they pay property tax, they pay sales tax, they pay income tax, and it's, a lot of it goes into the schools and the universities around the state. And the last thing I want to do is to pay all of this and educate all of you and have you move out of Ohio and go to North Carolina or Florida or Georgia or Texas or something like that. Because they get a totally educated person for free. And it's our loss. But the things I worry about is that's facing the country right now. We've been watching the news, and I want to hopefully hear from all of you. But we've got the issue about Ebola, and the situation that's happened over in Cleveland, where one of the nurses got on a flight from Dallas and now is infected. So we have 2 people now that have been infected in this country from the individuals that came over from Africa. ISIL. If you've been following that whole issue over in the Middle East, you've got that organization that's trying to take over Iraq, Syria, part of Turkey, Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan, and to take it back to where it was, where they'd like to see is a state that existed in the 7th century AD. We also have an issue on the economic side that's going to affect everybody in here that I worry about. I used to serve on the budget committee. This country is $17.5 trillion in debt, and it's going up. To kind of give you an idea, because take your age right now and add 10 years to it. Just take your age and add 10. The reason I say that is because today we are paying $224 billion just to pay interest on the national debt. $224 billion to pay interest on the national debt. In 10 years' time, just think where you are in 10 years' time, we'll be at $880 billion. Best case scenario could be $1 trillion. Now that's interest payments. Now if your total budget, let's just say at that time is, let's just say, throw out a number, 4.5 to $5 trillion, all of a sudden you might be paying, a 20th of your entire budget to pay on a dead horse. So what's that going to do for, everything that you all are going to say that you're going to need the country to be doing? Well, what we're going to be doing is paying interest on something that you all didn't even have anything to do with on a debt. It's going to affect when you go to college on loans. It's going to be when you get down the older and, we want to buy a house or a car or a washing machine. And if you have to borrow money to do it, the interest payments are going to be going up. So it's going to affect everything that you're going to do. It's going to affect your jobs. It's going to affect everything that you're associated with. So I want to make sure, for one thing, that we balance our budget in this country. The state of Ohio, along with 48 other states in this country, all have to balance their budgets. But federal government doesn't have to. So we can just turn on the printing presses and print more money. But all that does is run up the debt. We also have to go out, if you ever want to go on and Google this one, U.S. debt held by foreign countries, it's over $5.6 trillion today. So what we're going to be doing is going back to when we were at the very infancy of this country, relying on other countries to finance our debt. And you're not in control of yourself if that happens. I want to make sure that you've got jobs when you graduate, here, especially in the state of Ohio. But at the same time, if we have so much on the regulatory side coming out of Washington, I was at a college about 2 years ago, and after I got done speaking to the class, one of the students said, knowing what you know, what would you get a degree in so when you left this place you could get a job? Which is pretty good, because back in 2011, over 50% of people under the age of 25 in the United States that had a college degree were either unemployed or underemployed. Over 50%. So it took me about 3 seconds to think about this, and I said, I don't want you to laugh when I tell you this. I became a compliance officer because of the Dodd-Frank legislation, which affects the financial side, of Obamacare that takes over 1/6 of the American economy, and all the other regulations that are coming out all the time. You'll be employed for the rest of your life. But you're really not creating any wealth doing that. So it's so important that you all get involved, and it's so important that you're here today in what you're doing with the organization. Because again, the best question to ask is, if you don't get involved, who will? And I'll give you an example. When I asked how many were 18 and if you're registered, thanks very much for raising your hand and saying that you were. I'm really lucky. I have a lot of like high schoolers and also middle school classes that come down to Washington for their class trip every year. And I always like to ask this one question. I remember one time there were about 100 students on the Capitol step, and they were kind of like this. I'm standing here, and they're up on the steps. I said, I'm curious, how many of you are 18? And since there was a senior class, most of everybody that was in the spring raised their hands. I said, great. Now, how many of you are registered to vote? This is what happened. Not up. I said, wait a minute, raise your hand. And so they finally raised their hands up. And I said, okay, everybody else that didn't raise your hands, I want you to look who raised their hands, and this is who's in charge. You have no right to complain. You have really given all your power over to the small group of individuals. And that's what happens in the United States. When I was a county commissioner, it was right after an election. I had this guy, this guy was mad. And he came up, and he was almost right in my face. And he was really upset about this one elected official in Wood County. And so I'm listening to him for a little bit, and I said, well, okay, what do you want me to do about it? What do you want me to do about this elected official? And he said, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and tell this guy to do this, this, and this. I said, wait a minute. I said, you do realize that I'm a commissioner, and I only have control over the budget. I don't have any control over this individual. And then I knew the next couple of questions that were coming. He said, well, who's in charge? And then my question back to him was, can I ask you, we just had an election. By chance, did you vote? At which he said, I never vote. And then I said to him, well, you're not in charge. And you know what happened? Then he got mad at me. But people have got to understand that what we have in this country of a right to be able to vote is one of the greatest things that we possess. Because I tell people that we have revolutions in this country every year. Because, in Ohio, we elect our municipal and our township people in the off years. And in the even years, you're electing for the state legislature, the state house, or for Congress, or the president in those years. But we have that happen every year in this country. And when I watch the news, and I was a history major when I was in high school or in college, and I still read history all the time. When I'm on the airplane flying back and forth, or 5 o'clock in the morning, is when I get my 1 hour to read. every day, and I read history. But if you just watch current events and go back to when some of these countries in Eastern Europe got the ability after being under the yoke of communism after World War II, and a lot of people have proved that they hadn't voted more than once. They dipped their thumb or their finger in a purple dye, so they'd have to show that they'd already voted, but they were proud of it. But they were also told in a lot of spots around the world, when they had that on their hands, that they'd be killed. There were people that stood in line, I can still remember, for days just for that first chance to be able to vote. The first chance to be able to vote. And you know what's happening in this country this year, and in this state? That it's going to be a dismal turnout. A dismal turnout. I can't believe it. That people in this country that have that right and that ability should have the duty to perform it. But they're not doing it. You know, for you that are 18, to just go back to folks that had the duty. I'll tell you another story real quick. You know, 18-year-olds didn't have the right to vote for a good number of years. It hasn't been all that long. Back in World War II, my mom came from a family farm. They had 7 kids. My mom was the second oldest. It was during they came up through the Depression, the war started. Her one younger brother dropped out of high school and joined the Navy when he was 18. He was what they used to call the 90-day wonders. Because they had 16 million people in uniform. We had to get people around the world. We had to get them out there. But you know, they didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have the right to express what they were going to do, but they went out. And it wasn't more than 3 months from when he was stationed in the Southwest Pacific that he was out in a PT boat on patrol in an attack one night in the Southwest Pacific and was killed at 18. But we have over 1 million people in graves in this country today that were killed for us to defend the freedoms that we have. But it's really important that we all remember that we have to do our duty, and that duty is to vote. You know, I've heard it all. Well, you know, I just didn't have time. Have time? We start early voting in this state. You know, like on October the 7th. You have all this time to vote. And it used to be you had to have a really good excuse not to get an absentee ballot. Not today. The Secretary of State sent every registered voter in this state on a letter with an envelope to be able to go out and get an absentee ballot. That's how easy it is. But I still have people say, well, it was raining. I had to take the dog to the groom. I just didn't have time. We have 13 hours on election day, and we have all that time before. But it's so important, it's incumbent upon us to think back to those that said, you know what, that stood on a green on April the 19th in 1775 in Lexington in Massachusetts. And were told by the British to stand down and go home. They didn't. A shot rang out that day that was heard around the world. Nobody knew who shot, who was the first shot, but it started a revolution. But the ideas and the values that we hold so true and dear in this country aren't going to be effective unless we participate. Because our founders all said the same thing. We live in a participatory type of a democracy. That if you don't participate in this, how's it going to work? They wanted an educated population. They wanted people to be involved. They want people to, find out what was going on around them. But if we don't do it, it's just not going to work. And I really worry about the future because, I'll never forget 1980 watching the election returns come in. And Ronald Reagan had an upset and beat Jimmy Carter, who was running for re-election. And George Will was being interviewed. You can still watch George Will and read his columns today. But they were talking about how many people didn't even register to vote in that election cycle. And he said something I never will ever forget. He said, well, do we really want people that aren't interested to even being bothered, that would come out to vote, to even have them? That's not the way we should think of it. We should want everybody to be participating, that understand this, that it's their obligation and duty that they have. So everybody in this, here today, and everybody that's involved in this activity, I think that you understand that. But again, it's so important that you do it. And if I could, if anybody's got questions, suggestions, ideas, I'd love to hear them. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. And, if you ever have any questions, problems, anything else, something else I just mentioned a couple of things. One, that, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the office, that the boys' state, girls' state, if you ever want to get involved in a great activity, I speak there every year. It's tremendous. The other thing that we just had was our academy night. I know there's folks, some students up here that are very interested in attending the academies, which would be at West Point, the Army, the Naval Academy in Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, and the Merchant Marine Academy. They'll really take a good hard look at it when we have academy nights. We'd love to have you come down and hear. If you have questions, let us know. It's a great education. It also, when you look at it, it's about, I think the last time I heard, like the West Point, like about $235,000 scholarship. There's a commitment, of course, to your country afterwards. You can't ask for a greater thing to serve the country and have that education along with it. But if anybody has any questions, I'd love to hear them or suggestions or ideas. Thanks very much.